Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is Scott with Crescive Soil Services, and we wanted to do something a little bit unique today. And we're going to let you in on a little interview between me and Kay the Guy, which is another Soil Food Web graduate that I met through YouTube. And because of my role in the industry, and because I'm in Dr. Elaine's coursework, and because my wife Sarah and I are used oftentimes as a success story of the Soil Food Web courses, I get a lot of phone calls quite regularly, actually. And whenever there's a sale, I get a lot of phone calls. And I do feel that it's my role to have a lot of those conversations and to help propel the movement and to, at least to a certain degree, point people in the right direction. And sometimes I might spend 1 to 2 hours on those phone calls. And the school is getting so big at this point that it's honestly somewhat difficult to keep up with a lot of those phone calls to the capacity that I feel is what I need to contribute. And so a lot of the times they're the same 5 or 6 questions. A lot of people are wondering a lot of the same questions. And so I asked Kay the Guy if he would come on and allow us to record our conversation so that we could just share it with the world and create a dialogue within the YouTube comment sections of this video to really kind of streamline the process, to be honest, and to just kind of get the information out there, get my thoughts published, and just kind of show the dialogue between me, somebody who's been doing this for several years, and Kevin, who's recently out of the school and ready to tackle the world. So thanks for tuning in.
So, getting down to questions. Now, these questions, where I would say is something that either I thought about prior to being a student and after being a student. So, at this point, it's really getting down to the specifics for those that are either thinking about getting into Dr. Lane's course or those that have just graduated. So, that's kind of where these questions are coming from. But, first question. What was your journey from uneducated to educated soil consultant?
Well, I guess kind of the annoying answer is I feel like this has been a lifelong journey for me. Um, my uncle's a produce broker in the Imperial Valley in Southern California. And I mean, as young as I can remember, we were going into fields, grabbing produce. My uncle felt it was very important that if he was going to represent a farm and he had to determine where produce could be delivered around the United States and oftentimes the world, he needed to know the quality of it. And we would literally go in the field, harvest some of the produce, take a look at it, eat it, cut it up, and he would make those decisions on the quality based on if he could send it around the world. And as we grew, we got more involved in the produce process. So I've done every aspect from cold room operation. I've been in the sales and brokerage office, and then I've helped with the fertilization strategies of some of the farmers in the field. And so I think a lot of the best training I got was literally sitting in my uncle's office when I had no desire or concept that I would ever end at this role, and listen to the outcome of the farming process. I would hear when things went bad. I would hear when things went well. And so that really kind of put me on a track to be interested in agriculture. And being from suburban Southern California, there's not a lot of agriculture, but there was cannabis. And, around 2009, one of my friends from high school, it was what I call the Prop 215 comfort era, when people could get a 99 plant cultivator's permit, stack them, and feel like they could grow 1,000 plants legally. And so, in 2009, 2010, one of my buddies built out a 20,000 square foot cannabis facility that had 4 different types of cultivation. And I feel like that was really the starting point for me to, well, first identify the need. I, in the most respectful way possible, all these really qualified, high quality cultivators didn't know why they were doing something. And so that really started the quest of why. And then I think it was around 2012 was when I decided that I wanted to actually get out of cannabis and move into agriculture and contribute to the family business through fertilization help, agronomy techniques, and things like that. So I first found out about Dr. Elaine in 2012. And in 20,
So prior
oh,
prior to Dr. Elaine's, you had mostly just hands-on experience with growing plants. So your ability at that point was just understanding how the plant looked in order to uh, promote its health.
Correct. And it's not like my uncle
Okay.
was all that sophisticated, like, oh, they needed more calcium, but he would talk about quality parameters. And then when I was in cannabis, you would see these people that were growing top of the industry quality, top shelf, and you would be like, why are the spider mites there? And they're like, I don't know, you know? And so I was
Yeah.
always the nerdy science guy that I wasn't afraid to dig into the scientific literature. I wasn't afraid to try and read some scientific research. The problem is there's not a lot of accessible information. And somewhere around 2012 is when I found Dr. Elaine's work, and I was like, man, this woman is talking about protecting powdery mildew from compost tea. How do we get compost tea? And I think it was in 2013 or 2014, somewhere in that range, Dr. Elaine offered one of the first online classes. She had been doing it for years, but it was like a new era of development of the courses. It was just before the environmental celebration courses. There were 16 modules. And essentially what it was you would meet with Dr. Elaine once a week. And I think it was 16 modules. So I think we met for 16 weeks. Ironically enough, my wife, Sarah, was in that course. And there was only 26 people from around the world in that course. And ultimately, my wife, Sarah,
Mm,
that I would meet later at the ECI farm was in that. But I would say
mm,
from the day I started pursuing the microscopy techniques of Dr. Elaine and took those first foundational soil courses, it took me about a year and a half to where I could say my microscope math is accurate and I've done enough of this practical applications that I can sit down at the dinner table with Dr. Lane, drink a couple porters, and like bro down on the information, I guess you could say.
mm.
So I'd say like the technical answer of, okay, now I'm soil food qualified was about a year and a half. Um,
In that year and a half period of time, were you just basically kind of doing it? I'm assuming you had another job and you were just kind of doing it experimentally, just for fun. Were you testing? What kind of things were you testing? Were you testing cannabis farms or farming projects? Was it just, backyard stuff? What were you testing at that time?
it was everything that um, I could get my hands on, to be honest. And so I was still heavily invested in cannabis. I had a lot of access. You know, the first facility I got into in 2009 was 20,000 square feet. That was massive for the time. And so once you
Mm,
get to a certain
mm,
level, there's an accessibility of other projects. So I, in a kind of informal sense, was the, peer network consultant guy, I guess you could say. Like people would have standard problems. Most of the problems an indoor cannabis farmer experienced, I had already seen in that first farm, and so
mm,
that brought me into a level of cultivator that made me somewhat of an authority over the average people in my life that had a 4 to 18 liter. But as soon as I became qualified to do the quantitative analysis, I put every single popular trend to the test. And if you're watching this
mm,
and you're considering a path, as soon as you are qualified to do the even qualitative analysis, put everything to the test. And that's what I did. And I think that's one of the most
mm,
important things. And, I'm a big believer in you have to manufacture what you want. You have to visualize it and you have to execute the steps to create it. And so I wanted a job as an agricultural consultant. So I woke up every morning like it was my job, even if I didn't have anything to do. And my friends legitimately thought I was crazy. They're like, a microscope? You're going to be a microscope guy? And I was like, just watch. I was like, just watch. And I would wake up every day and I would find 5 to 8 hours worth of stuff to do. And in that process, I would analyze samples. I started releasing my abilities to Instagram and was offering free microscope analysis to anybody that would send it to me. So I was doing analysis
mm,
of problems. And then I put all the advice to test, all the popular tea brewing activities, things from internet, retailers of goods. I put everything to the test. So by the end of 2014, 2015, I had already specifically quantified every single thing that people were doing and executed it myself. I think that's one of the most important things of the success of my journey is that in mid 2014, when I got invited to the first cannabis farm outside of my peer group, I already knew what they were doing. I already knew what the problems were, and I knew what the correction were. All I had to do
mm,
was execute. And I really believe
mm,
that's the main part of why I was successful is because I did the groundwork. If they were fans of XYZ from the internet, I already knew a good idea what they were going to do. I knew what the shortcomings from a biological standpoint of that predominant narrative, and I knew what to go right to,
Mhm.
you know.
So we kind of already answered question two, which is the length of time to kind of learn the trade, which
Mhm.
you had explained was about a year and a half
Yeah.
after learning the information.
Mhm.
What I gather from that, what you're basically saying is that the main skill set that you learned was using this specific tool, which is the microscope, to quantify everything. So the biggest I would say mystery to plant health is in the soil, and a lot of people will talk about the soil, the rhizosphere, and microbes and all these other things. But this is the only tool that will quantify everything in that medium.
Yeah, and I think the kind of general agricultural community at wide severely undervalues the quantitative and qualitative microscope techniques of Dr. Lane Ingham. I come from a racing background. I have two family
Mm-hmm.
members that are NASCAR crew chiefs. We grew up racing everything, and we took it to a whole different level. And we took metrics, we quantified our adjustments
Mm-hmm.
to the car, and we correlated it to our track times. And if the tire temperatures got worse, the track times got worse. And so when I was coming into the professional consulting space, I needed a way to manage variables and quantify variables so I wasn't just guessing, because that's the biggest problem in
Sure.
agriculture. Even people that you think are cool on Instagram, most of them are just guessing. They don't know why. And what I value most about Dr. Elaine and her contribution to my professional career and my life was that microscope analysis. It's pretty damn black and white. Um, if you make a correction or you make a change to the cultivation space, within 3 to 5 days, you can measure if that was a good or bad idea. And it
Mm-hmm.
it completely moves it out of the emotional and into the data points. And for us to be successful consultants, there's a lot of emotions involved with the farmers. They have techniques that they're extremely emotionally fond of. They don't realize that their tea brewing techniques are literally the cause for all of their problems. And so if you just come in and tell them
Sure.
your tea brewing sucks or your tea brewer sucks, they get flat out offended. And so you have to kind of slip in the back door with a data set and you say, okay, well, let's investigate this a little bit further. And you just use the microscope quantitative analysis and you can see very clearly,
Sure.
look, this is what's causing the problems. And then you can make a small measurable change, quantify the results, and that and the scientific process, I'd say, like that's what Sarah and I really excel at. She comes from the nursing world where lives are on the line. I come from the black market world where lives are on the line, and you can't just be winging it. And there's
Sure.
there's a lot of times where farms will run into a problem and they'll exhaust the entire list of Instagram influencers and popular people, and they can't solve the problem. And a lot of times I'm the last choice, and they
Sure.
come to me, and so far without fail, we've been able to identify the actual problem, make the corrective action, and move towards a positive outcome using the
Mm-hmm.
microscope analysis along with all the other stuff that we do.
Well, you're taking out the guesswork, which is the great part of it. I
Mm.
think what you talked about right there, the emotional attachment to specific methods may have been something that a family member who they were very close with had taught them in order to grow plants. And that may have been successful with a certain period of time or generational period of time with what was existing in the soil. But after generations of crop cycles, there may be a depletion there that's not there or doesn't exist anymore, but their emotional attachment to that same method is something that you have to combat to bring the data in to tweak it or maybe slightly change it. What it seems like you're telling me from your approach is using data and not necessarily changing everything of how the entire aspect works on that farm and their methodology, because some, like you said, some of those methods may be an emotional attachment to what they've been doing for generations. And so it sounds like what you're doing is mainly quantifying the data using a microscope, using tests, using things that can actually give you specific variables and their amounts in order for you to give them the proper prescription.
100%. And the reason why I was able to go right to the top of the industry and make massive influence was because I knew why I was doing things. And I think one of the biggest hangups that the kind of organic living soil realm has is there's this kind of like, I would call it a dysfunctional level of attachment to solving all problems with intuition. And I'm a big advocate of intuition. And I think that the farmer's intuition is extremely powerful. What the farmer doesn't realize is your intuition has been co-opted by commercial interest, and you are so confused that you need something to recalibrate that intuition. I feel that the microscope work that we do actually recalibrates the farmer to their intuition. And oftentimes, I would not say oftentimes, I would say literally every single time we've gone to a farm where they're trying to intuitively do everything without any sort of metric, they're not correct. There was one farm one time that somehow through intuition was maintaining soil chemistry to a remarkable degree. I mean, it was dead on to the Albrecht parameters without any soil chemistry analysis, but then his biological stuff was way off and some of his nutritional management was way off. So even the one farmer that was keeping it in the wickets with intuition was only 33% of the total whole. And I think that we need to recalibrate ourselves so that intuition can be correct. And with matters of biology, people don't even pay attention to the fact that you're doing animal husbandry. And when you are doing tea, when you are brewing tea in a tank, you are brewing life. And
Yeah.
it's as if a seed maker was never paying attention to sex and just did open seed runs, not paying attention to sex at all, and just release those seeds. Like nobody would ever do that.
Hmm.
But on a metaphorical
Hmm.
standpoint, that's how everyone's doing their teas. And
Sure.
you need to, and if people understood how much it varied from brew to week to month, your head would explode. The
Yeah.
variation is
Yeah.
unreal.
All the
Unreal.
variables.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Temperature and everything. One thing I would say that I understood from Dr. Elaine's program is that kind of an analogy to it is that there are people that are, in the medical field that their responsibility is to tend to people. There are people that are in the livestock industry that are tending to, cattle or sheep or whatever it is. And what we learn from Dr. Elaine's program is learning how to tend to these microorganisms that are everywhere, that nobody pays attention to, that if we cultivate them in the proper way, we get an explosion of available nutrients, nutrient cycling that happens and occurs under the soil where really nobody's paying attention to. But that's what we're basically doing is we're tending to those microbial livestock to do what they're supposed to do so that there is the absolute highest level of life and the perpetuation of life between the soil life and then the plant life, which obviously in
Yeah,
turn goes all the way up to us.
absolutely. And if people understood how much they were leaving on the table by disregarding biology, they would stop immediately. And I've taken an extremely conservative approach, even though I had a lot of cannabis history. When I moved into the commercial space, for the first 2 years, we only gave recommendations on biological matters. We only analyzed the process, made corrections, and provided feedback. I didn't come and talk about canopy management. I didn't do soil chemistry. All I did was correct process, procedures, and the soil habitat with the microscope methods by Dr. Lane. For those first 2 years, we legitimately worked with the top 1 to 5% of the industry. And when we came in and corrected biology and made no other changes, right off the top, 30% increase in all outcomes on the first harvest. That's how powerful this stuff
Mm-hmm.
is. And this is how much
Sure.
literally everybody is neglecting.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of switching gears a little bit, kind of going back to your history,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I wanted to ask was you had mentioned before in previous conversations about books that you have read in order to understand chemistry, because Dr. Elaine's program goes a lot into biology. So, what would you recommend, or what were a couple of key, maybe books or references that really put into perspective the chemistry part that is maybe the other side of the coin for being able to have super healthy plants if there are certain depletions of certain minerals in that medium?
Totally. And Sarah and I are both big readers. Sarah, I'm more of a researcher. Not, I'm a little less books, more just like scientific papers, internet research, and books. Sarah is a massive
Mhm.
book reader. She is constantly reading 3 to 4 books at all times. And again, you have to create the things that you want. And I wasn't able to go to a university program. So I had to pretend that I was in a university program. And so when Sarah and I started dating in 2015 and started to join forces as a business, from that point on, for the next 3 years, we legitimately approached it like we were going to a university. And so every quarter, we would pick 3 to 4 books and we would read through it and we would then converse with each other as if we were going through school. And so this is just a small list of what I would deem like
Mhm.
the 7 basic essentials or something. And so I think hands down, if you're trying to do the Dr. Lane courses, you need a balance of soil chemistry. I absolutely adore Dr. Lane Ingham, and I credit a tremendous amount of my life to her. I met my wife through her. That's been working out pretty awesome. And I absolutely love my job because I did the thing that nobody else was willing to do and put in the work to do the microscope and figure out how to apply it to the agricultural space. I will forever be taken care of financially because of that. Like, we're to a point where I'd have to really screw it up to lose my opportunities in life. And I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for that. Having said that, the soils that are made, the strategies for managing soil chemistry are so incredibly dysfunctional. You have to manage soil chemistry. And so I feel like one of the best ones there is Dr. Arden Anderson. So this is Science in Agriculture. It's essentially a start to finish book of the things that you need to know for the agricultural process. There's even a chapter on biology. Uh, what I like about Dr. Anderson is he's kind of the yang to Dr. Lane's yin, so to speak. And, he is a medical doctor. He's an agricultural professional. He's worked with Dr. Kerry Reams. He's worked under Dr. Albrecht. And he's kind of like the generational tree, like Sarah and I are to Dr. Lane Ingham. He's that for Kerry Reams
Mm.
and Dr. Albrecht, essentially. So Science in Agriculture, it's a little bit older information. It's not wrong by any stretch of the imagination. Some things have updated in science, but it's a really strong foundation for matters that aren't covered in the Soil Food Web course. So I'm a huge fan of Science in Agriculture. The next one I think is just another cool book, also written by Dr. Arden Anderson. It's called The Anatomy of Life and Energy in Agriculture. It's a real thin book. What I like about this book is they went through and tested various problems with plants and were able to isolate down to what mineral element was off. Turns out almost all of the pest problems are calcium first, phosphorus second, and then trace minerals and nitrogen toxicity. So this book covers some of those things. It also is really easy, accessible. I mean, it took me like a day and a half to read this book. It's $9 on Kindle, according to this Amazon screenshot. I think that's another great book. I've read absolutely everything that Dr. Arden Anderson does. I've gone through his DVD course. I absolutely adore the man. Anything that he writes is good, but I would start with these 2 books. Next is Neil Kinsey. Neil Kinsey is kind of one of the living fathers of soil chemistry. I would put him at the level of Dr. Lane Ingham for the soil chemistry standpoint. His lab is top notch in the world. Some of the top agricultural consultants on the planet uses his lab and his services. And Hands-On Agronomy is a pretty good book that covers foundational principles of soil testing and soil chemistry management. Neil Kinsey also has some amazing audiobooks on Acre USA. I've downloaded them. They're fantastic. This was a book that was shared by a farm we worked with in 2016 that he learned about it through a friend that actually got to go to a soil chemistry university or University for Soil Chemistry. And it's called Marshner's Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants. It is a textbook. I'm not afraid of textbooks. I think that textbooks can be very valuable. And if you're going to go through the Dr. Lane courses, it's already being treated like an upper graduate degree. You might as well just jump full in and get yourself a online degree. So Marshner's Mineral Nutrition of Higher Plants is a fantastic resource that I use. I've used some of the clips and images from this book on future cannabis episodes where we talk about the problems with anaerobic conditions. It's one of the best single point resources that you can go to figure out what the hell all the nutrients do, which is actually kind of difficult, really. Like the Dr. Arden Anderson
Sure.
courses cover that. So if you get to his DVD set, It's no longer available anymore, but if you are able to find it, he goes through what the different elements do. This book also does that. And it just kind of covers a lot of the phenomenon that you need to know of how plants function. I think it's extremely important in helping you solve problems in the cultivation space of any type. And then this is another book from the same organization. This is Mineral Nutrition and Plant Disease. I'm sorry, not the same organization, but loosely affiliated. You see these two books get referenced a lot by John Kempf. And if you type in Mineral Nutrition and Plant Disease, there's like 9 other books associated with it. Over time, we're going to slowly add those up, but it's just phenomenal research. Essentially, what this Mineral Nutrition and Plant Disease book does is it literally takes the top research of why a virus is there, why Pythium is there, and correlates it to the different nutritional management. It's a mind-blowing book. This one's a little bit smaller than the Marshner's Mineral Nutrition. These 2 books have been tremendous in helping me understand the why. And you have to know the why. You can't just guess.
Sure.
This book, Healthy Crops by Francois Chaboseau, absolutely blew my mind. I am going to preface it. This is a French scientist talking about science research from around the world, translated into English. This was one of the most difficult books for me to get through because it is so clinical and dry and translated, and it's a little bit old, and it's honestly really repetitive. So halfway through, you're like, all right, I get it. You see John Kempf cover this one a lot. Essentially what he did was he went to clinical trials around the world that shows the actual cause for pest pressure is through the application of pesticides. And so one of Dr. Lane's major stances, look, you got to get off the pesticides. If people understood that their choice of IPM products is literally the physiological and mathematical cause for their problems, their mind would change about the process. And this book just hammers it home with research after research after research after research of the popular compounds at the time were in the lab shown to absolutely break down protein formation. So it's either, proteolysis, I believe, is the word they use for protein breakdown. You hear John Kempf talk about it a lot. And so what it does when you introduce those chemicals is it takes the plant from forming proteins in a healthy way to basically turns it into a cannibalistic state, which is literally the foundation for pest and disease. One of the things that is in this book is he mentions that he wishes he didn't write the book because of the backlash that he received from releasing this type of work. And there's been some things that I've brought to light and I've received a tremendous amount of backlash for as well. And I would say that in a lot of ways it's not worth it to try and enlighten people, but nonetheless, you should get this book. This is another book that I like. Dr. Elaine's courses give you a lot of the practical, but she can't cover all the phenomenons of biology. So this is a book that Sarah found. It's called Brock Biology of Microorganisms. I have the 15th edition. My cover doesn't look like this image, but I did match up the ISBN number, and it is the 15th edition. My cover is black with a blue dot, so I don't know what that's about. But this is just a fantastic first-year biology book that covers everything from what a cilia is to what the compounds produced are. This book helped me really understood why root aphids are there, because you can read about some of the noxic compounds they're producing in anaerobic conditions, and you can kind of follow the trail to, well, clearly these organisms are feeding on the anaerobic compounds that are produced in the root zone. I think what's cool about this book is right in there's a big old picture that clearly defines the difference between a flagellate and a ciliate. And one of the funny things about the cannabis industry is, like, if you go to like Tim Wilson Microman, people love that guy and they give him a lot of credit. They compare him to Dr. Lane as the similar level of authority. But in literally every single one of his videos, he misidentifies ciliates and flagellate. And if you open up a first-year textbook, you can clearly see the difference. And I think that shows in the cannabis industry specifically. Literally nobody's opened a book. Literally nobody has tried to check to see if the people that are deemed as authorities are actually qualified to be an authority. And that's all I've done. Like even Dr. Elaine, I take the information for what it is. I respect her for what it is. And then I form my own opinions. I do my own research. I try to see where other research agrees with her. I try to see where other research disagrees with her. And literally, like, nobody in the last 15 years has opened up a first year biological textbook to see if the people that they deem as authority are even within the realm of a first year biology student that's 18 years old. And they're not.
Right.
And that's just, I don't know, one of the weird things. But I would say that's my essentials book list. Like if you're going to try and start semester one, I would start there. There's a whole bunch other that we like. There's a lot of stuff on Acres USA. There's like these family trees, like Dr. Albrecht, Carrie Reams. Under Carrie Reams is Dan Scow, Charles Walters, which those are the two guys that make Acres USA. And then there's Dr. Arden Anderson. And then under Arden Anderson is John Kemp, right? And so you kind of follow the family tree of these different sects. I've read every book from the Carrie Reams family tree, from Dan Scow, Charlie Walters. I just can't stand their writing style. Dr. Arden Anderson gets to the point. But I think it's still valuable. Every single book I've read, Mainline Farming, Ask the Plant, there's valuable nuggets. But that's where I would start for sure.
So the thing I would say is I went into Dr. Elaine's program before a lot of these other people, and I would agree that the information and the majority of the popular information on YouTube and all these other social media platforms is that a lot of people are guessing. They're using something that was already, they're just replicating what somebody else said or a recipe. And Dr. Elaine's program really goes into, they go into videos, honestly, of how a ciliate moves versus a flagellate moves, and what a testate amoeba looks like versus an amoeba cyst, and fungal spores and their differences, and really understanding the details about what each one looks like and does in order to understand the differences between healthy soil and unhealthy soil. And I would say a follow-up question to those, with the amount of information that you have from her and then all these other resources, including the chemistry, would be, have you seen situations where you had to go in and just fix the biology only, and you didn't have to fix the chemistry, and the system just turned on and then just kept perpetuating itself, and there was really no chemistry that had to be added or amended?
This is where I veer off from Dr. Elaine's statements. And one of her most inflammatory statements is that you don't need to address soil chemistry, and then you only need biology. And I think if you understand the journey of Dr. Elaine, you can understand why she makes these claims. She has received an astronomical amount of attack, abuse, and harassment from the chemical camp and the mineral camp. Even John Kemp, who I have a lot of respect for, he took a really shameless jab at Dr. Elaine at the very end as they were ending the last podcast. It's just, I don't know what's up with these dudes and their ego. But I think when Dr. Elaine says that you don't need to address soil chemistry, it's partly an emotional reaction to literally 4 decades of abuse and attack, hacking websites, doing all kinds of ridiculous shit. And I don't think it's a wrong statement. Like I said, the first 2 years in our professional consulting, the only thing we did was correct biology, and we added 30 to 40% on the top of literally the industry leaders that people look up to, hands down. One really famous farm that we worked with, in the first harvest, we got them a 30% increase. In the second harvest, we got another 30% increase. And then in the third and fourth harvest, we were able to squeak out like another 18%. That was only correcting biology. That was while soil chemistry was extremely dysfunctional.
Were those in pots or containers, or was that in ground?
Everything. This was an organization that had 2 farms. They had 15, 20, 30 gallon pots and 4x8 beds. And in those soils, I did do a soil chemistry. That was before I was really qualified, but I still was like, look, we need to look at this. And I was outsourcing that work to other agricultural advisors. And like, the soil chemistry was so off, my advice was you should throw the soil away. And they didn't want to do that. They ended up taking the time, you know, and which wasn't a bad decision. It just wasn't the way I would have taken it. But um, you can always create significant improvement in outcomes, all outcomes, potency, yield, growth rates, everything changes for the better when you correct the biology to Dr. Elaine's problem. The obstacle that you're up against with that strategy is that as soon as you start ramping up biology, you start ramping up the consumption and conversion of what is in the soil. So if you're not maintaining soil chemistry, you're going to run out of nutrients faster, plain and simple. So you're going to accelerate yourself to a point that's problematic. On top of that, the predominant narratives for top dressing soil chemistry, I would define as atrocious. They are so incorrect from a soil chemistry management strategy. Most of the mineral top dress strategies, most of the online retailer advices, plain and simple, destroy soils from a Albrecht chemistry standpoint. And so when you go to a cannabis farm that's been following a predominant narrative and you look at the base saturation values of those soils, oftentimes the calcium base saturation is 10 to 15% lower than it needs to be. Sometimes it's 20% lower than it needs to be. Usually magnesium's 2 to 3 times the target. Usually potassium's 2 to 6 times the target. So in that situation, that's where I go, why would you not want to address that? Because to me, you know, biology is Dr. Elaine's entire life, and I commend her for dedicating so much. I'll be honest, I don't know if I could have made it 4 decades with what she's been through. And so the only reason I keep going through the attacks and abuse that we've received is because she does. And one of the times her and I sat down and I was kind of talking about some of the things that we were going through, and I asked her, I'm like, man, how do you keep doing it through all these website attacks and abuse and bashing? And like when I first got in, there was a website that you would type in Dr. Elaine. The first hit on Google was some shit attacking her. And she just plain and simple says, when you know something is right in your heart, you don't stop. And I that's what keeps me going, to be honest. And I kind of got off track a little bit, but it's not my complete identity. My identity is winning races and setting track times. I come from a racing background where I'm trying to win the track championship. In order to push the top of the industry higher than they've ever been, you have to take a holistic approach. We address water chemistry, we address nutrient management, we address soil chemistry, we address biological behaviors, we address cultural practices in the facility. We do everything. And I think that's how you should do it. So if you go to a native soil, if you go to an unfarmed soil, sure, all you need is biology. That's true in that statement. But in my experience, the advice from other areas of agriculture are so incredibly dysfunctional, you have to correct that. You have to. And so to me, it's not a really practical approach, bless her heart. I don't agree with it at all. And the advice I always give is if you're going to come out and be an agricultural advisor and you're going to use the microscope as a tool, you damn sure better learn soil chemistry, because look who's making it. The reason why people keep coming back to me is not a lot of consultants have been all that successful. You look at Nick Tomasini. He is absolutely crushing it. Nick Tomasini had 5-6 years of working on mineral chemistry before he got to Dr. Elaine's courses. He also was somehow involved in the organic certification process. So he had been going to farms. So if you look at me, Nick Tomasini, my wife, Sarah, you know, next to Todd Harrington, we're undeniably the most successful graduates to come out of Dr. Elaine's school. All three of us take a holistic approach and address every aspect of the agricultural process. I think that's why. That's 100% why. And
so that brings us, sorry.
No, you're good.
I don't want to cut you off before you finish. To our next question, which is going to be obviously understanding chemistry and biology is important. Obviously, you learn the biology part in Dr. Elaine's program, and then obviously gathering some more information, whether that's books or seminars or something on the chemistry side, is obviously important to your business aspect. But what else would you say that you need to learn from somebody either a pre-graduate or postgraduate of this course, or even the consultant course? They've passed through all that and considered a consultant, before opening up for business, what would you suggest? Like, hey, before you just start opening up for business, you probably should learn this, this, or this, just to make sure that your business plan, all the holes are plugged before your open sign is in the window.
Well, kind of plain and simple is you need to know more about the farmer's process than the farmer, because bless their heart, not one single farmer has been 100% honest about every single thing that they're doing. And so because I had been inside so many cannabis farms during catastrophic crop loss where they were honest with me, I knew what they were actually doing during that explosion. And so when I come into a farm, I have to find visual cues of what they've been doing. What are the bottles on the wall? What do the plants look like? What have they told me? And so you need to know the entirety of what they're doing before you get there to really make an impact. Or stand back and just provide microscope analysis to the process. Just be an analytical tool. I think where people really get screwed up is they come out of the course, they're all gung-ho and fired up, and they start want to telling people how to set up environment. They want to make advice on tractor equipment, and you just need to stay in your lane. And the reason why Sarah and I have become so successful is we just slowly and incrementally added the things that we were professionally qualified to as we felt comfortable. Because at the end of the day, you're supposed to be helping farmers, not putting them out of business. And there's been a lot of people that come out of Elaine's school that literally put farms out of business. There was one guy in particular that was one of Sarah's mentorship students. While Sarah used to be a mentor for the program, I only had one student. I wasn't very good at it, but Sarah was great at it and did a lot of students. And this one particular person was working with a lavender farm. And during the mentorship with Sarah, he just fell off. He just fell off and just disappeared. And like a year later, through a random set of circumstances, we ended up at this lavender farm. And what they ended up doing was the farm had to replant that year. So they spent like $380,000 on new plants. He came in, put in a cover crop, started going gung-ho, started watering, doing tea. He wasn't qualified to quantify the tea. He literally killed the entire farm. So it was about an $860,000 bit of damage. And that's the reality of it. That's not the goal. The goal is to only provide benefit. And so you need to, I think, before you offer your services as a consultant, you need to have already tested in your own garden the predominant narratives. It's pretty easy. They haven't changed in years. They're not good. They're phenomenally incorrect from a biological standpoint, any of them. No disrespect to anybody, but they're atrocious. And so you need to know what those things are. Are they following Dragonfly Earth Medicine? Are they following Tim Wilson? Are they following Build a Soil? Are they following Kiss Organics? Are they following K&F? You really need to know K&F because that's really popular right now and it's killing a lot of gardens. And so you need to come in and know how to correct it, what the underlying issue is so you can get right to it. And so you need to do these things in your garden. Go online, find the tea brews that people are following, scroll through the feeds of Instagram and brew those teas and quantify it. Take a soil, do the Clackamas Coot text, find out where the errors are, find out where the opportunities are. You need to know what people are doing so that when you come in, you already know where the sticking point is. You already know what's likely going to be incorrect, and you need to have a reasonable idea of what the path for correction is so that you can execute it in a timely manner. If you can't get all that done, then maintain a second job and just provide analytics. Some of the most valuable bit of work I ever did in my entire life was for an entire year after I became qualified to do the qualitative and quantitative analysis with the microscope. I did free analysis for everyone and anyone that would send me soil, and then we would talk about it. And I would interpret the results. I would tell them what I knew. I would be honest about what I didn't know. And then they would be honest to a reasonable degree about what they were doing. And that was hands down some of the most valuable work experience I've done in my entire life. Because when I started offering my professional services, like the first farm we went to in 2016 that was a commercial farm, they were doing the Clackamas Coot Tech. I had already done the entire thing. When I showed up, I knew what was wrong. I knew what to correct.
Sure.
I knew what aspect to pull out of the equation, and I knew what to put in to correct it. You look like a hero, And the funny thing is the predominant narrative from that camp hasn't changed much. So what I did in 2016 to correct that farm, people are still doing wrong. And so the opportunities for other people to make positive impact are literally unlimited at this point, because the breadth and scope and expansion of these popular trends are far outpacing the graduates from the school. And so there's literally an unlimited amount of work to correct things. You just need to be familiar with the technique. You need to feel comfortable with the technique and correcting it, so you can just come in and execute.
So practicing the trade of what you learn and trying the trend recipes that most people can't tell you what your end result is data wise. Just practicing all of the different ones that way, because the farmer's looking at the same recipes and they're trying them out, but they don't obviously know what the result is. So the only result is the risk that they're taking on the plants, and whether being successful or neutral or completely killing their plants by throwing something off. So your, I guess, advice for me and everybody else that's kind of in that gray area at this point is practice. Don't charge any money if you really don't know what you're doing, because obviously then you have not only the legal liability possibly, but also the moral liability of, you just screwed somebody over because you weren't ready. And so I do kind of feel that, like you had said, I had even talked to some of my neighbors, letting them know, hey, I know how to test soil. I'm not going to charge you for this
Mhm.
because I just graduated school. And in the same aspect of anybody graduating school, if they just got out of a law school, they're not going to go stand in front of a judge and Johnny Cochran to go litigate. I mean, they're not going to have the experience to really get through that. So,
Mhm.
in kind of the aspect of practice, what Dr. Lane says toward the end of her seminars, which is practice, practice, practice. Get good at knowing what you're doing. Make it almost second nature, as opposed to, hang on a second, let me flip through my notes here and figure out what's going on. It's more or less, I have all these experience. At least what you're saying is a year of experience, a year of just getting out there, testing soil, getting notes, quantifying data, maybe making some spreadsheets, and really getting in the groove of starting a business, even though you're kind of doing it for free.
Mhm.
And I completely agree with that, because
Mhm.
I feel like if you get a lot of people that just graduate this school and then jump in and then screw something up, they're probably just gonna step away forever, which is not really what we want.
No, no, and it doesn't help the overall movement, and that does happen a lot. People come out of the school, they're gung ho, and they start giving advice that they're not qualified to do. And the reason why I say do for free in the beginning is just like you said. If you're a doctor, what's the first thing they make you do? A residency. If you're an attorney, what's the first thing they make you do? Intern. And you need repetitions in sports. I call it going to the batting cages. I have a long sports history. I used to do high level athletics. We sent kids on to NCAA Division I schools that set national records. Like, you have to go to the batting cages. And the reason why I say don't charge in the beginning is because it starts you from a place of humility. It starts you from a place of being humble. And if you come in just inquisitively, non-emotionally, without the pressure to pay your bills, you're more inclined to behave appropriately and not put the farmer into a compromised state, which is really number one. And over time, you will gain that confidence. And I believe that if you start out with it not being out about the money will come. And the money comes when you execute well and consistently without blowing farms up. And you just don't be afraid to let it take a process. Like I said, I approached this like it was a college degree. I wasn't afraid to let this 16-week course be 4 years of development with 2 years of upper graduate degree. I wasn't afraid to let it be a lifelong journey. And I think,
Mhm.
you know, what's kind of crazy for me is when I took Dr. Elaine's school, it was after I had closed down a very successful construction business, started a second business, and failed my ass off. And I found myself in an extremely compromised state. I had a wicked head injury. I was waking up, and didn't know my name. It was an extremely difficult time for me. And at that time, I wasn't even looking like, man, I would love to make my construction business money again. I was just like, man, I need a way to survive. And if I get this technical trade certificate, I might be a valuable employee at a cannabis farm. That was my original goal. My original
Mhm.
goal was to, as regulation was moving through California, that I would be a desirable employee that had a decent wage, that had a specific skill that nobody else did. That was what I originally
Mhm.
shot for.
Mhm.
And in the most humble way possible, the reality is Sarah and I are changing the face of cannabis and agriculture on the planet. And we've provided advice to farms around the world. 2 years ago, I got invited to Macedonia to meet with their vice president of the entire country at the State Department to brief them on what was working and what was not working in the state of California and in the United States in regulated cannabis as they open their emerging program. Like, I sat down with the number two in command of a country to brief them on what is happening in cannabis because I was brought there by another advisor. Essentially, they just said, bring who else you think will be most valuable. And so they didn't know who I was, but we had seen so many problems. I was able to give a very critical, analytical cost per square foot failure rating, essentially. And because of the experience I have. And my original goal was to be an employee that made more than $20 an hour. That was my first goal, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah. So
and, you
humble
know,
beginnings, like you said.
mm, and maintain
So
humility. That's been hard for me. I've had points where my egos kick me in the nuts and, it gets rearranged here and there. But I mean, it was hard not to let your head get big when you're adding 30 to 40%, literally the top 1% of the industry. Like, literal famous people paid for by rappers trust the analytics that I provide. And, that you know, everybody has their moment with
Mhm.
that, but maintain humility and know why you're doing something and don't be emotionally attached to something. Let the data speak. And that's one thing that Elaine does not get enough credit for is she is constantly evolving her strategy. The only thing that doesn't change is her view on mineral chemistry, but I've already defined why. And
Mhm.
like she's in court, like some of the things that she teach in the courses are things that Sarah and I came up with. She's got her ear to the streets. She's got her ear to the people doing the day to day. And if something comes in
Mhm.
that's a better strategy, man, that gets put right in the program. And
Yeah. I
you
did
you
I
know,
did appreciate that about her.
hmm
During small points during the segment, she would
hmm
say, "Well, this is something that a research student at a university may do if you want to go more in depth of that, or this has the aspect of having more research is needed for this direction. So this is where once you acquire these skills, go out there and go make new discoveries
hmm
with your microscope and how the system works." So that's the thing I appreciate about Elaine is she is very open-minded to the additional feedback that she's training us in order to quantify and then bring that back to the forum to say, hey, I made this discovery. I have this on video now of these
hmm
microbes doing something that we didn't know that they did. And so
hmm
that's one thing I did appreciate about her as well.
Yeah, and if more people in the industry behaved like that, we would be way further ahead than we are now. And I think that's something that the other influencers in the industry should take note of because the reality is like there's people in the industry that have been providing advice that's very widespread that we've shared our analytics of their process with. Like there's one particular person that gives advice that we showed them it was extremely problematic in 2017. I defined it 3 times in person with literally face-to-face conversations of how problematic their advice was, the financial cost to it, what I do to correct their bad advice, and they haven't changed shit. And you know, I I think Dr. Elaine needs way more credit for evolving with what is in front of her and reacting to improvements of even her own advice and other
Mhm.
influencers in the industry should take note. And that's where I think the greatest benefit of working with Dr. Elaine directly because I picked that up from her. I
Mhm.
picked up
Mhm.
the fact that it's okay to evolve. I picked up the fact that it's okay to say, you know what, this is the way we used to do it, but we're finding that there's a better way and there might be some problems. And other people in the industry that are influencers don't do that, plain and simple. There's a lot of
Well, this
egos involved.
I think this brings us kind of to our
hmm
next step, which um, we're both entrepreneurs.
hmm
I'm actually in the automotive industry, dabbling in this industry to kind of create another business. But which leads us to our next question, which is if we were going to outline the steps needed before somebody could open up their own agricultural consultant business, what steps would that be? And first, I wanted to kind of preface that um, opening up your own business means being an entrepreneur, which, as you know, as an entrepreneur, there's a lot more than just the job that you're doing that you obviously have to acquire and the self skills that you
Mhm.
have to acquire to be on task and to your scheduling, all the things with insurance, your liabilities, your business profile. Make sure you have a good accountant, an attorney base, just in case you have any legal questions, those kinds of things. And I think that when you had said that your goal was originally to become an asset of an employee at a certain, and that could be cannabis,
Mhm.
it could be just
Mhm.
your local market garden,
Mhm.
it could be really anywhere. But if you get a start somewhere, and as opposed to just opening up your own business because you're a recent graduate with these new skills, I mean, maybe you can elaborate on that. On being an entrepreneur is much harder than people think, and maybe starting off as just a really sought after employees, maybe the first goal.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part. Like I feel like I was groomed since birth to be a small business owner. I have three uncles that started businesses from nothing. I don't come from a generational wealth family. I come from a family that manufactured their own generational wealth through small business. So I have three uncles that started with absolutely nothing and turned those into multi-million-dollar a year businesses through my childhood. And so I have only been focused on small business. My degree is in small business administration with an emphasis in finance. That was critical. I started a construction business when I was 24 and was very successful. That was critical. But as far as my soil food web journey, I think what really made me successful was in that beginning time, I already had the cannabis experience, so I got into it. And there was a guy that was managing a lot of property. And the first work I got was providing analytics for other consultants that were struggling with regulated processes. So they were getting their ass kicked by new things that they hadn't met in the black markets of cannabis. And so I was working underneath them quietly, work I can never talk about because it's, their work essentially. But I essentially would come in and tune up everything that they were doing. One of those farms I worked at for 8 months on a day to day, and he did allow me to do some consulting. But once I like really started being traveled to commercial farms and markets he was consulting in, that's when he cut it off because cannabis people especially are really afraid of competition. They'll cut your leg off. But that was extremely valuable information. I worked there day to day, 40 plus hours a week for 8 months. Sarah would come once a week and do analytics, and I tuned up his entire process. That was essential for my survival. And so if I were to go back again and I ultimately wanted to be a business, I would try to be an employee somewhere first, whether that's a food farm,
Mm.
whether that's a cannabis farm. I chose cannabis because there's 4 harvests in a calendar year and you can make one change and just so I learned 100 years of farming in 1 year working with one organization that I would have learned through food crops. And you have to know the day to day because the farmer's not going to tell you everything. You need to be there, seeing, doing, executing, getting your hands dirty. I think if you have a job first, it also takes the pressure off surviving as a business. People still aren't super comfortable paying for this information. They still, because people are so quiet, like
Mm.
people don't talk about the benefits we've provided. So the market's still kind of like, is this helpful? So the demand is changing radically every day. I think more and more people are talking about the benefit. I'm starting to be more public about what we do, which I think helps drive the market. But it's still kind of in its infancy, so to speak, of people really adopting it widespread. And so it's going to take time. And if you're only providing microscope analysis at $60, $100, $150 a sample, it's really difficult to be financially viable with just that strategy. You need site visit rates, you need monthly payment fees, you need different revenue streams, so to speak. And I
Mm.
think I would first focus on the day to day. I would get myself a small business education, and then I would try to form alliances. I think the greatest reason why Sarah and I were successful is we're both capable of doing the microscope analysis. Dr. Elaine herself said to our face, we were literally doing things for the first time. Dr. Elaine has 4 decades of it, but because she's just by herself, she's setting up the tea brewer, she's doing the extract, she's doing the microscope. Sarah and I were able to do real time, boom, 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 boom. Like I would set up the tea brew, she would do the microscope, we would swap, and we were just like, I remember one
Hmm.
project we did 28 microscope analysis, 28 microscope samples in a 4-day site visit. And then we sat down with Dr. Elaine. I was like, how do we aggregate this information? She's like, this is first, kid. I don't know, figure it out. And so we had to like figure out ways to aggregate all this data. And so I think forming alliances would be really good. I would try to find somebody else that's also capable with the microscope analysis and figure out a way you can tackle projects together, or at least tackle experimentation together. That could be from a distance as well. So I have really solid alliance with Nick Tomasini. He's been extremely beneficial to my overall development because he had the chemistry background. I was able to provide him successful advice because we had a couple of years of practical application. And that is a relationship that gives back and forth. Same with Eli. Eli and I have a very symbiotic relationship. He's more in the large ag pasture range. So he bounces things back off me. I bounce things off him. Forming alliances is key, in my opinion. If you're just out there as one person by yourself, it's going to be a tough road. You need to be able to form alliances to accelerate your understanding and movement, in my opinion. And you just got to get the reps, man. You got to go to the batting cage. Like when you show up to a farm, you have to know what they're doing, and then you have to know the business and work incrementally as you go up. So, to be honest, in the first year or so, we didn't have the contracts needed to do the type of work we were doing at the commercial scale. And we ran into some shady ass people, to be point blank. Excuse my language, but there's some shady folks out there, and especially in commercial cannabis, you're dealing with every type of business, every type of business owner, every type of wealthy person, every type of investor. Just that in of itself is difficult to manage. And
Hmm.
move up slowly and incrementally with things that you feel comfortable with. And I think we've talked a lot about cannabis. I think it's important to note that I have literally done everything. We have worked with 6,000 acres of corn and soy. We have worked with famous botanical gardens. We have worked with city parks and rec. We have worked with golf courses. We have worked with landscapers. We have worked with shopping centers with dying palm trees. I just choose to do cannabis because so far they're fairly closed-minded, but of the agricultural world, they're the most open-minded to soil food web techniques. Um,
Sure.
when we worked with 6,000 acres of corn and soy back in 2016, they weren't ready. I would say last year was the first year that I started seeing food farmers like really ready. We worked with a grape farmer that was, 35 years of conventional farming, was ready to dive in. He ended up going through Elaine's courses. He's now full blown gone through the consultancy. Sarah and I helped him last season. There's another farmer in Southern California that's not even organic, but he's implementing the biological techniques with no desire to be organically certified. But the farmers are waking up to this. And so we jumped into cannabis to get repetitions, 4 harvests in a calendar year, multiple properties, multiple states around the world. And, if you're only working in food crops, you're never going to catch up to me in cannabis because of the repetitions we get. You're just never going to catch up.
Sure.
So,
So if you were going on to our next question, which is we kind of touched on it, which was, if you want to get into this, maybe starting off for free while you're working your day-to-day job, which could be something completely different than this
mm,
new hustle, or obviously trying to get into, a grow of some type of getting that hands-on experience. So there's kind of two ways of going about this. But let's say once you have a separate job, you have your own personal income that you're keeping all your expenses paid, and then you kind of start this as maybe a side hustle.
mhm.
What advice would you give about pricing the product or service of maybe just doing microscope work or just microscope analysis of soil tests? How would you say to kind of start the pricing for that service?
So that's as far as just the microscope work. When we came out of the school at that time, Earthfort was charging $154 or something. At that time, Dr. Elaine was suggesting people to charge like $60. And the advisors that had gone through the program that I had formed a mentee relationship with were doing that $60 sample, and they were struggling point blank. And so just as a business mind, I'm like, look, Earthfort charges $154, and literally the reason why I got my first work is people couldn't understand the Earthfort reports, and they couldn't understand how they helped. And so, no disrespect to Earthfort, but I don't think they provide any measurable benefit to the agricultural community, and they're charging $154. So to me, I said, why would I charge half or a third of what this organization is charging that provides no measurable benefit when I'm actually providing a measurable benefit? So to me, we started at $150 for the sample, and I still think that's appropriate. People that are on our contractual client agreements, we charge them $100. And what you have to understand is there's two factors. One factor is the time value of money. Even if you're fast, like if you really blast through an easy sample, might take you 45 minutes. You know, Keisha with Catalyst is quite fast. Sarah's quite fast. Dr. Elaine's quite fast. When I was doing it every day, I could do a sample in under an hour. If I only had to do one, I could do it in about 45, 48 minutes. But just say it's going to take you an hour. Then it's going to take another 15, 20 minutes to fill out your report, put together any comments. And then we always talk to the farm. So for that $150, I also will have a phone call with you. So I feel that we're extremely over providing the value for that $150. I think another important consideration about being a business is if your price is too low, people don't take it serious. And I take this extremely serious, and I don't want toe dippers. I want people that are at least find it valuable to pay for this analysis that can literally give them 30% increase in yield. We just started with a farm. Man, I always got to pause. You don't give too many details. You make people uncomfortable. But nonetheless, essentially what we provided them is going to be an $840,000 increase on this one harvest revenue. And we did like $2,500 in soil samples. If you can't see the value in that, I don't want to work with you, and because I have an extreme value for what I do and provide, I know my net worth to a contribution to a project. So there's a certain level of seriousness. If you don't charge enough, people don't value it enough, and then they won't listen to it. And then so now you're all just kind of wasting your time. So I feel that if you're doing a quantitative analysis with a report, it should at least be $100, $150. If you look at the cannabis soil testing, to do a potency testing on your flower, it's $145. And that tests 12 parameters. So I don't know.
So when it comes to pricing the product and making sure that you're pricing according to the value that you're giving the people, it kind of goes back to Elaine's original commandment, I would say, which is site assessment. So if somebody's really serious about giving you a phone call, and this is us giving advice to them, I guess, is if they're going to take the time to call you to say we want a soil sample test of what's in our soil, and you're going to outline what you're going to test, the data you're going to give them, and the explanation what that means. And I would also ask them, kind of make it the interview go the other direction as well, to say, where are you at this point? What is your yield? What are you shooting for? Giving you asking the client those kinds of questions is letting them know that you really care about their goal to get this information and what to do with it, and how improving the biology to a certain point, even if that's all and not chemistry, even if improving the biology is going to give them a 10% increase, that $150 for that initial consultation is really nothing to them in the aspect of their entire stream of expenses that they have to spend for everything else. So just to get a quick snapshot of, okay, what am I looking at for somebody who can quantify this data of what's in the biology, and bringing that aspect to them. Again, it's all about the customer experience, in my opinion. It's all about, okay, what questions and what data are you gathering from them other than the soil sample and those kinds of things, in my opinion, in order to give them a $150 presentation that's worth way more than that.
Mhm.
So I think that's where we really have to get it to.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to provide value. I'm not at all advocating charging 150 bucks and just shooting five numbers back. Like you need
Hmm.
to, especially from this camp, there's a lot of resistance against biological matters, whether you realize it or not. The mineral people, the online retailers of goods, they put a tremendous effort to cause doubt and discredit this entire wing. And so you have to overcome that. And so Sarah and I, compared to a lot of our peers in the cannabis space, have very conservative rates, and we always over provide. I always feel that a good business strategy, and you and I talked about your automotive business offline, that you do the same exact thing. You have to take good notes. You have to provide value. You have to provide a clear roadmap. And sometimes you're not that profitable on everything you do. Sometimes, like the project I just told you about that gave over $800,000 in increase, or 400,000, whatever it was, tremendous amount.
Hmm.
Um, Part of the reason why I did that was for the case study. So I got some
Hmm.
really good metrics at it. So I didn't get enough money to retire on it. I changed that farmer's world substantially. But for me, I got some really good metrics on something I wanted. So sometimes you have to do work for a different value. Sometimes you have to do work to foster relationship. Sometimes you have
Hmm.
to do
Hmm.
work to build your brand. And so for the first 2 years, we provided astronomical return on investment for the work that we provided. And for the first 2 years, operated very lean. We were very budget minded. We didn't spend money.
Hmm.
We were living out of a hotel on a NutriBullet doing protein shakes. We weren't living lavish.
Hmm.
We didn't buy new stuff. We just bought microscopes, tools, and built our brand and built our name. And that will forever take care of me. Like that's, you
So
know,
you built you had expectation at one point, and then the actual conclusion of service provided was much more. And that's, I would say, what ultimately built your brand to be as successful as you are. And that's pretty much what everybody's going to have to do
mhm,
is get down in the mud and be in the trenches for a while, learn all that information, learn how to talk with. I mean, it's called soil consultation for a reason, because you're consulting with the person. They're not just a customer. They're not just somebody just exchanging money. You're literally having to break that shell in some cases by creating an emotional attachment to get all the variables that they may just be almost embarrassed about.
mhm,
I've been using pesticides for 10 years and I
mhm.
really don't want to. And I've been doing that, but they don't want to tell you that. So it's almost like you have to create that relationship,
Yep.
crack that shell open, bring the walls down so that you can really create a better change with the information that you know and their ability to accept it.
Yeah, no changes happen without trust. The trust isn't built without a qualification of the experience. And one of the things with me with cannabis is I have a functional foundational knowledge of all the hydroponic techniques. I can relate to the farmer on stuff that they know about to qualify to them that I know what I'm talking about. And then we shift to biological matters. So
Mhm.
I have to speak intelligently about something that they are comfortable with. I have to speak intelligently about something that they're doing. And then I have to say, okay, now that I'm qualified in your mind to speak as an authority on matters, this is something I'm an authority on that you're not familiar with. And that's how you move them towards the goal. And so, in order
Mhm.
to do that, you have to have that experience. You have to build that foundational knowledge, and then you have to figure out how to build trust with people, and you just have to deliver. Plain and simple, you have got to deliver.
So on our last two closing questions, we went over a lot of information at this point
Mhm.
for people looking for these questions answered that maybe they're a little bit lost at this point. So if somebody had additional questions that we didn't cover in this video, what would you acquire of them to really, because like we had talked before, you get almost these weekly.
Mhm.
So hopefully this video covers a lot of those questions. But if somebody had additional questions that maybe didn't get answered or is not provided by the FC forum on the Soil Food Web's
Mhm.
website, uh, I would say what would you be looking for in order to say, hey, yeah, I will take the time to answer a few of your questions. What are the prerequisites?
Well, again, I think it's part of my duty to field some of these questions. Other advisors that have been successful have gotten burnt out on a lot of these, and they take a stance of no longer taking the questions. I feel it comes back to part of the humility. And so for me, remaining humble, I need to remember what it was like when I reached out to people. So, like, back when I graduated the course, and even now today, if you reach out to Earthfort, Matt Slaughter would yell at you and he would criticize Dr. I mean, it was just like a lashing. And when that happened to me, that didn't foster a relationship between me and him or even a level of respect. It made me say, I'm going to take this dude out. And so I think it's important to, you know, to remain humble. And so I need to remain humble and remember what it was like when I graduated and I was desperately looking for answers on where to go, and they weren't there.
Sure.
And they were not available.
Sure.
And the people that were in the established top were really good at swatting down at newcomers. And I believe that this is a cooperative movement. And so for me, if you come at me that same way, like, it's very common, no disrespect to this younger generation, I'm 40, but some of these younger kids, good God, they are so entitled when they call and they just start demanding answers about pricing and all this stuff. And it's like, look, man, if you were starting a department store, try and call Walmart, get Sam Walton on the line and ask him what his profit margins are. Like, good luck with that. Good luck with that in any other business. And so for me, the first part is you need to come correct to me and understand that you are a competing business in the same markets that I am with the same trends. And if you want my advice, come correct. Don't call and demand. Like I'm willing to do this video with you because of how respectful you approached me on that first call, how you and I talked. You were so polite and respectful. And I'm not saying you got to bow down to me or none of that shit, but like, don't come and
Courtesy goes a long way.
Yeah, don't. So there's people I don't talk to, but it starts with basic principles. My phone number is available online. I'll put it in the description. My email is available. I really try to get back to everybody that reaches out to me. A lot of people call, don't leave a message. If you call and leave a message, 99% of the time I'll call you back. Sometimes I forget. You sent me a text. I responded to the text. We set up a call. You've been extremely polite and respectful, and there's a value that you're providing to me as well. And so it needs to be a symbiotic, reciprocal relationship like this fungal hyphae above our heads, right? And so I feel that it's my role to provide a certain level of guidance. I feel that it's your role to understand that you are becoming a competing business going after my bag, so to speak, right? In slang terms, and just be respectful with that. I'm going to try my best to keep up with all the comments in these respective videos. My email's out there. You can reach out. I do feel that it's time for us to change our role a little bit and move into teaching businesses. I've said from day one when I went through Dr. Lane's program, there is not enough business support. People need a contract. People need a mentorship on how to manage their business. I think I'm finally ready to tackle that. And Sarah and I are in the storyboard stage of putting together a master class. And
Where can we find that class once it's available?
So, obviously check in with these videos. I'll put it in the description as it develops, and check with our new website. Sarah's finalizing a new website as we're creating this video. That will have a lot of it. That new website allows us to host video programs and have subscription type aspects. And so, first step, stay in tune with, your YouTube channel, my YouTube channel. I'll try to keep up with the comments as much as possible and update as the time goes. It will absolutely be announced on my website, which is crescivesoil.org, which is spelled CRESCIVESOIL.org. When I came out of the black markets, I was super nervous. I didn't want to be found. And so I chose a really hard name, and it stuck, and the business stuck, and we made it. And now I've got this really hard name, which is kind of funny. So think about your name. When you go to decide your business name, it's not what you think is important. If you think it's a good name, call an 800 number and try and give them your email for that website over the phone. If they can't get it, it's a bad name. That's how you choose a business name. So people need to be able to find you. People have a hard time spelling our name, which was the original goal. I didn't want to be found. But here we are being found.
Well, so I would employ anybody listening that, Scott is an extremely good guy giving out information basically to all his potential competitors in the market. Now, I think one thing that he recognizes with a lot of other people in this growing movement is that there are enough customers for all of us to have successful businesses, which is why we're talking about this.
Hmm.
I was looking at the data between 1971 and 2019, and the world's population more than doubled in a 50-year period.
Hmm.
So I think we'll have plenty of people because of the growing food market in order to have enough clientele, which I think he recognizes, in order to kind of get this information out as much as possible and promote what's going on, but also at the same time realize if you're calling Scott trying to get information from him, you're
Hmm.
technically a competing business. So be nice, be courteous. He's willing to give you the information. And so, I mean, if you're going to take that step forward, then if you can put on that hat to just be as nice as you can and courteous, then I think you'll get a lot of bees with that honey.
Yeah,
So
yeah, totally. It's basic interpersonal skills, right? And the one request I have is just respect the process and understand how serious this is. People really underestimate how serious Sarah and I take our job. Like, this is such important work. And I think the hard part of my evolution has been like when I came through cannabis during the OG era, if you had one of those OGs, you did not share. You didn't even share it with friends. You
hmm
just
hmm
cropped it out and, did your deal. And in cannabis, it's still that same way. Like I'm really shocked at how little the farms that we've worked with have talked about our success. All these people that talk about regeneration and saving the planet, if they were really about it, they would share the results that my wife and I have
hmm
provided for them, and they don't.
hmm
And I don't blame them for that too much because it is a dog eat dog world out there, especially in cannabis. But the reality is, whether people want to or not, or believe in it or not, the only way humans are getting out of this alive is by addressing the biological matters on the planet. And whether the planet turns into Mad Max or turns back into the permaculture paradise that the Native Americans and indigenous peoples put, this is going to happen, whether you like it or not. And
hmm
Sarah and I have worked on ecological restoration projects with the NCRS, which is the National Conservation and Resource Services. I've quantified the forest. It's literally halfway to the succession needed to support that ecosystem. We are already knee deep in desertification. We are already knee deep in climate change, climate instability, climate shit show, whatever you want to call it. It is here. It cannot be denied. And in my
hmm
opinion, the only way humans are going to get out of this alive is if they do this work. And that's why now Sarah and I are willing to change our focus a little bit to help other businesses because there hasn't been a lot of people behind Sarah and I, Nick Tomasini, um, Todd Harrington, that have really made measurable financial stability. Catalyst has
hmm
done pretty good making compost. So they've done pretty well maintaining, but as a compost producer. And it just, you know, we can really only maintain 8 to 10 long-term farming relationships at a time. We take
hmm
on one random farm a week. Like that's so little in comparison. We've worked with well over 200 farms, well over 2 million square feet of cannabis cultivation space literally around the world. And we're not even scratching the surface of the literal need. And we just need more
Well,
people to do this work.
as you mentioned, it is in the infancy right now for what kind of work that we're doing.
Mhm.
And I would kind of agree or maybe disagree on the point that you had made earlier about there's some big companies that are out there that will try to take us out. But at the same time, they're also all talking about microbes. They're not talking about the specific things that we talk about, but they are talking about microbes. So they're kind of ushering in the door for us to get in there and say, everybody's talking about microbes and all these popular places and all these chemical companies and saying, oh, microbes this, buy this micro product, that micro product.
Mhm.
At this point, we can say, this is what's in this micro product. So if there's more of us, there's a lot more voices that can quantify those kind of things, not jumping into the market and trying to, change around this farmer's production or yield, but just start testing things, going to Lowe's, and then getting some bag soil and say, what's in this Lowe's stuff that says it's got microbes in it? Because everybody says they have microbes now, and testing those kinds of things and getting that data out there. That's
Mhm.
as a group, as a community, I would say that's what's going to take the micro conversation to the next level, where we can actually tell people what's in certain things. And I think that accountability will
Hmm.
take that market and actually bring it to a much higher level where maybe there are big players in there who actually take the time to make sure it's precisely what they're advertising, because there's a huge group of people that are coming out of this kind of coursework that can actually say, hey, this is true or this is not true. And I think that's the big thing about it, is that you don't need to necessarily go out there and change, a farm the way Scott's doing. You could start it at your local community to say, hey, we only have a place to get, we have all these, small market gardens that maybe sell compost, and this place is the best. Don't get this stuff over from your local hardware store, because they just get it from this mass producer that's just cooking everything, and all it is anaerobic bacteria or anaerobic microorganisms, and it's just going to kill your plants. If you can do that in your local community, I would say that's going to be the benefit to you and the people around you, your local influence. You don't have to go travel the world to create change. You could do it right there with this information in your local neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. I would just say be careful of publicly outing products that are bunk. That would be my one advice.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
advice,
maybe, or just find the best ones. Find the
Yeah.
ones that you would say is, I tested all these different places, and maybe
Hmm.
I'm not going to name names, but the best one I found is this. So maybe
Hmm.
you're not necessarily going bat to bat with a big company and
Hmm.
what they're already producing, but maybe finding in your community of your region of your state where the best compost production is coming from, in
Hmm.
order to tell people this is the best thing, promoting that small business that is doing it right.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what we do in our consulting work. We qualify inputs with the microscope. We let them choose the things they think we want to use. They want to use. We put them on the microscope, share the data, and then they can form their own opinion. I prefer to work that way.
Mhm.
There's a tremendous amount of backlash if you publicly post um, the shenanigans of the biological concerns in the industry and how incorrect the advice is. But, if you want to try that, I'd say go for it. I personally try to work directly with the farmer one on one, where we can control those conversations and keep them from getting out of control. The crazy part about once you get to a certain level is I'm now of a level of influence that if I speak disparagingly about a product, I'll get non-disclosure. I'll get cease and desist, and I'll get lawsuit threats. So if you're going to do that type of stuff, do it before you're somebody, and then stop doing it when you're viewed as some, whatever that means. But and I don't even know when that transition happens. There was a very clear point when it happened for me, and I didn't even know that I was that influential. And so Dr. Elaine, there's a lot that she doesn't say because she'll get sued off the planet. And so I don't really know how that works where you like get a certification stamp on your driver's license or whatever. But there is a certain point where you make a certain level of influence that if you even just share basic data of how biologically absent a given product is, that then becomes an attack to a business, and then there are real repercussions. So, but yeah, that's the work that needs to be done. The people
So,
in the cannabis industry specifically are just could not be more remarkably incorrect on biological matters. And so that leaves a tremendous opportunity for people that are correct on biological matters. And it leaves a tremendous number of farms that are way off base that could be put back in line. And so, however you choose to approach that is your own prerogative. I choose to work one on one quietly.
so our last question,
Hmm.
Scott, in closing, what would, what has been the most unexpected outcome of this soil food web journey?
That's a good question. I think there's kind of two aspects to that, I guess. I guess the first aspect would be how long it's been for narratives to change. Like when I started offering my microscope services to the internet at large in 2015, 2016, I never dreamed that in 2021, the same people would still be saying the same incorrect information, especially after I've shared with them that it's problematic. There's a couple people I've literally shared one on one in private, like, yo, you're putting farms out of business. This advice is incorrect from this standpoint, from biological matters. This is my correction in those situations. This is how you should update your information. And they don't update that information. And I don't want to assume or assert why that is. I think at least 50% of it is ego based. And I think a lot of it is it's maybe people that are not having the best interest of the organic community in mind, paying for that type of misinformation and doubt creation. So that's been a real bummer to me, honestly, that weighs on my heart and kind of makes it hard to really love what I do, because we are literally running on a runaway train towards catastrophic climate disaster and the extinction of human beings. And some of the people that are given the badge of regenerative heroes are literally accelerating that train with terrible advice, whether directly or accidentally, indirectly through ego-based matters. And trying to think what else. There's like a wrestling match going on next door. Sorry, it's really distracting. But we're in a little office complex here. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's the main point. I really thought that the market. Well, I guess the second point to that question is, or the second answer to that question is, I'm flat out shocked at the reaction to my contribution to the market. I thought for sure when I started this, that when I did the work that nobody was willing to do, to put in the time and effort to put in the hours needed to do the quantitative analysis, that when I provided that information back to the market, a lot of times the reaction is not strong, and a lot of the reactions are very negative. And I thought for sure, like I always wanted to let the farms be the voice of the work, and we would never talk about our work. We are working behind the scenes with people in the top of the industry. They have brands to manage. It's not my place to come out and go, yo, Johnny Z had a catastrophic crop loss and this is what we figured out. Like that's not up to me. And so I take a role of being the silent operator behind the scenes. And I thought for sure some of the farms at this point would be like, yo, Scott and Sarah came in, we got a 30% increase in yield in all categories. Our total cannabinoids went up by 10 points. We are blowing everything out of the water. And I'm really disappointed in a lot of the people in the regenerative community and cannabis especially that hold that stuff secret for their own personal gain, which I understand why they're doing it. I'm just saying we are on a runaway train towards climate crisis. They're defining this time period in our history as the sixth mass extinction, which includes the human species. That's real shit. And the people that wave the banner of the regenerative community, I think, are doing the most damage. And so I personally feel it's time for people to get out of the way. And I think it's time for new people to stand up. And I think it's time for new people that are qualified with this microscope technique to stand up and make their voice heard and make an impact on the market and try to give the humans that want to survive this sixth mass extinction a pathway and opportunity for providing food crops, for managing water resources, for managing the health of the planet. This is literally the most valuable, important work on the planet, and that's why I've given my life to it, like very literally. And there's plenty of opportunity out there. There's plenty of work, and I'm going to do my best to provide the support for the people that make that leap. Within reason, obviously, we all got to be businesses, but that's the commitment I've made. And I'm falling in line with Dr. Elaine. Like, I know this work is real in my heart. I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to keep pushing through regardless of what the world presents me. And we need other people to do that. We need other people to join in this work. We need other people to educate farms. There is so much need right now, and not one business, not one person can do it. It takes a coalition. It takes a cooperative movement. It very literally takes a movement, and we need people to be a part of that movement.
That's awesome. I
Mm-hmm.
completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, I just want to thank you for taking the
Mm-hmm.
time, Scott, to really answer all these questions. I was just thinking, I'm probably going to talk to Dr. Elaine and or maybe put it on the FC forum that there's a link to this video
Nice.
that they can find it and have a lot of the students that are either within the course or have graduated that are still having conversations on this course
Mm-hmm.
to see this kind of information coming directly from a consultant who's been in the trenches and who's creating success, but also running into obstacles that pretty much is going to take this student school
Mhm.
army to really to bring the voice of what you're saying out into the public. And like we had both said, the school seems to be growing rapidly,
Mhm.
and the student base seems to be growing rapidly. And I think that if they can get this information and kind of run with it, hopefully not trip over as many of the deadfalls that happen in the industry, things that
Yeah.
you've been through, in order to avoid those, but help promote this situation and not lose students to jumping in too quickly,
Yeah.
and then just completely walking away after botching startup
Mhm.
business.
Yeah.
I think that's really what's going to help create the change you're talking about.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And again, and thank you for joining on this. I have a lot of conversations like this, and I'm willing to have them over and over again, but in the effort of streamlining the process and being more effective with my time, I really appreciate you coming on and participating in this with me, and anywhere you want to share it, that's fantastic. Again, I cannot underestimate the value that Dr. Elaine's courses has provided to my life. I literally met my wife. It's changed my entire life. It took me from having a goal of trying to make more than $20 an hour while I had recovered from a brain injury to literally traveling around the world doing literally dream. This is dream stuff for me. And I wake up every day excited about the value I get to provide to farms. And, I just can't underestimate how unique Dr. Elaine is in that she evolves. She removes the emotion from the critical assessment, and we learned that from her and incorporate the scientific process to make radical change to all markets every day. And, we just need more people to do this work. Like she says, there's more research to be done. I can't do it all.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah, man.
completely agree.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Scott.
Yeah, man.
And if anybody wants to check out more on Crescive Soil, you can check out his website
Mhm.
or all the links that he has posted. And I will also post those links in my description as well.
Thank you, man.
All
Good
right,
luck,
thanks,
guys.
Scott.
Yeah. Talk to you later.